Another tree that is fairly common in this area is the hickory tree. This is a hickory tree that you see here in front of you. There are several varieties of hickory trees that grow in this area, but you can usually distinguish the hickory tree by its rather distinctive leaves. Hickory trees have compound leaves. The leaf is made up of, usually 5, often 7 leaflets. You can see on this tree here the compound leaf. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in this case 6, 7 leaflets on one stem. How do you know this is a stem and not a branch with leaves? Well, look where it attaches here. This whole part here is a single leaf. The leaflets on a hickory tree are arranged opposite each other. By that I mean, when you see one leaflet coming out of the stem, you'll see another leaflet coming out from the opposite side of the stem, but at about the same position. The leaflets on a hickory, especially the 3 outermost leaflets, tend to get broader, wider, as you get near the end. So they widen kind of slightly as they are moving out from the stem, and as you get about the halfway point, they suddenly get much broader. These are typical hickory leaves here. Here's a good example of how the leaflet broadens fairly slowly but gets much wider by the bottom third of the leaflet than the top third here. Kind of bulges out here at the bottom. Also, the edges of the leaflet tend to have very, very fine teeth. So they're somewhat jagged, although this can be very difficult to see. These teeth are almost like the teeth you might find on a steak knife. We call this a serrated edge, as opposed to a smooth edge. So most of the time, you will find a very, very finely serrated edge on a hickory leaflet. Both poison ivy and hickory have compound leaves. Hickory usually has between 5 and 7 leaflets per stem, whereas poison ivy has only 3 leaflets per stem. This tree here, this is a hickory tree, and it has poison ivy growing on it. So you want to be careful and make sure you know which is which. Here's the poison ivy, and here's the hickory. If we look real closely at these down here, this here, which I'm not going to touch, is clearly a poison ivy leaf. Look at the ones right below it, where I'm pointing here. There are 5 leaflets here. You can see these leaves grow out of the tree, whereas this leaf is growing out of the vine. So here's a good example of poison ivy and hickory right next to each other. And as you look up this tree, again, you want to be careful because we have both poison ivy and hickory leaves side by side. As I said, there are several different varieties of hickory tree that grow in this area. And it can be difficult to distinguish the different species of hickory tree from their bark, even though it's fairly easy to recognize hickory trees by their leaves. But of course in the wintertime, you don't have this opportunity. There is one exception though. There is a hickory tree that's actually fairly easy to recognize by its bark, Once it becomes relatively mature, say 30, 40 years old, I'm not going to show you what that tree is. Instead, I'm going to ask to see if you can pick it out. This tree, this type of hickory, is called a shagbark hickory. Can you see any tree here that looks like it might be a shagbark hickory? It's this tree here. Notice how the bark looks fairly shaggy on the tree. It appears to be peeling upward, like maybe the plates are attached at the top and letting go on the bottom and starting to curl up. This is still a fairly young tree. On a more mature hickory tree, this becomes even more obvious. If you ever see a mature shagbark hickory tree, you'll know it right away. There is a look-alike to the hickory tree that grows in this area, and it's called an ash tree. The ash tree, like the hickory, has compound leaves, usually with 5 to 7 leaflets on a stem. The leaves on the ash tree tend to be a little bit more narrow. They don't bulge out toward the end the way many of the leaflets at the end of a hickory leaf bulge out. The edges are not as rough, they're smoother than the hickory. The problem is there's so much variation in size and shape of both ash and hickory leaves that it's very, very difficult to distinguish one from the other just by looking at the leaves. So to really tell them apart with any certainty, we have to look at how the stem of the leaf is attached to the branch. On an ash tree, the leaves have an opposite arrangement. By that I mean they grow out of the branches in pairs from opposite sides of the branch. You can see a couple of pairs of leaves leaving the branch of this ash tree here. On a hickory tree, the leaves do not come off the branches in an opposite pattern. If you look at where the leaves are attached to the branches, it's almost random. They're not in pairs on opposite sides. They are just kind of alternating along. You'll see. There. There's a couple that are close together here, but there's also some random ones. And so this is not an opposite pattern. Compare this with the ash tree. Here's another hickory tree. Look at how the stems come off the branches here. We got one here, one here, one here. We got a clump of them right here. There's no pairing up of the leaves the way they are on the ash tree. Sometimes at the end of a branch, you can see some hickory leaves that might make you think it's really an ash. If you look at the end of this branch here, it does look like there's a couple of pair of leaves that are opposite each other. But remember, you need to look at the entire tree. As we look at more and more of this branch, we'll see that the trees are not arranged in pairs. They're arranged singly in an alternating fashion. So this is indeed a hickory and not an ash tree. Here's another tree with compound leaves that you might think is a hickory because of the compound leaves. But if you notice, there are many, many more leaflets on every stem of this tree. Probably 16, 18, maybe 20 leaflets on these branches here. This is an ailanthus. This is not a hickory. And you can tell because there are so many more leaflets on it. Walnut trees and sumac trees also could be mistaken for hickory, but more like these trees here, they have many, many more leaflets on each leaf than the hickory does. The hickory rarely has more than 9, usually 5 or 7 leaflets. per stem.